You are about to listen to an exclusive conversation with Roel Vestjens. He is the CEO of Belden, an electronics manufacturing company with around 8,000 employees around the world. This is one of over 100 CEO interviews that I did for my brand new book called Leading with Vulnerability. I also surveyed 14,000 employees around the world to really figure out how leaders can approach vulnerability in the right way. Because one of the things that I've discovered is that if you're a leader or not a leader, the way that you think about vulnerability and approach it and the impact that it has is going to be very different. Actually, Adam Grant, one of the people who endorsed my book, gave a great quote, which I think summarizes what the book is about. And he said, "This is a thoughtful, resourceful read on how leaders can be more candid about their foibles and fears without sacrificing their effectiveness." So how do we balance the competence, the confidence, but at the same time, the vulnerability needed to be able to connect with our people? So if you want to learn more, head over to leadwithvulnerability.com. Again, that is leadwithvulnerability.com. So you are going to listen to the first part of this interview right now. The second half, if you're interested, is going to be available at greatleadership.substack.com. Again, that is greatleadership.substack.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another conversation on leadership. Today, my guest is Roel Vestjens, the CEO of Belden. Roel, thank you for joining me.
I appreciate the opportunity.
So for people who are not familiar with the company, why don't we start with a little bit of background information about what you guys do and how many employees you guys have?
So we have about 8,500 associates. We're truly global, so less than 50% of the revenue is in the United States. About 60% in total is in the Americas, and then roughly 30% in Asia, and about 10% in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So we make signal transmission products. So we build the infrastructure that helps customers on their digital transformation. Mm-hmm. So think in terms of cable, connectors, but also active components like switches and gateways. And we serve three markets. The biggest market that we serve is industrial automation. Okay. So think of, for example, when Tesla builds a plant or General Motors builds a new facility for a new car, our gear is used on the machines, on the robots, as well as the communication from machine to machine on the factory floor. So that's an example.
Pretty cool stuff.
That's a little bit more than half of our revenue. And then the other two segments that markets that we serve, they're about equal size in revenue. One is what we call broadband and 5G. So those are solutions that we sell to, for example, Comcast or Charter Communications to expand their network, to satisfy the ever increasing need for data, right, that we all have. Yep. And the last segment is what we call smart buildings, and that's connectivity solutions in buildings such as hospitals, non-commercial real estate, and data centers.
Very cool. And as we were talking about before I pushed the record button, you're in one of my favorite cities, St. Louis, the chess capital of the world. So every time I go over there, I stop by the chess club and see if I can get like a lesson or see if there are any tournaments going on.
I have two children, a 19-year-old daughter. She plays, and I have a 17-year-old son who is a fanatic, and I drag him from tournament to tournament here in St. Louis.
Oh, is he pretty good? Do you know what his rating is?
I don't know what his rating is. No, he tells me, but I forgot what it is.
Wow, that's awesome that you have kids who are playing chess. That's fantastic. Yeah. So today we're talking about vulnerability and leadership, and I thought maybe we could start with a very broad question first, and that is, when you hear vulnerability or the phrase vulnerable leader, what comes to mind for you? How would you define that?
Yeah, what immediately comes to mind is just being humble. Being humble. Vulnerability to me means that you understand that nobody has all the answers, so including yourself, and there is no need to cover that up or to change the topic or bully others until you get your point across, right? That's the opposite of what a good leader is supposed to do. So just being humble, showing up in situations as a human being with gaps in knowledge and perspective, but showing up in full acceptance of those things and being open to learn from other people.
I like that definition. Can you share a time, or do any stories or examples come to mind for you when you were vulnerable or kind of lived up to that definition? And as many stories as come to mind, feel free to share. I think that people love those kind of stories and examples of CEOs being vulnerable.
Well, in all honesty, I've been with this company for 16 years, and I took over as CEO almost exactly 2 years ago. And it's very interesting because I've had a long path of being prepared. Before this, I was appointed COO, which was not a role that we typically had. It was designed to facilitate the transition from the previous CEO to me. So I was as ready as could be, but then you're actually in the seat. And if you're not humble or vulnerable before, then you most certainly are. And so what I did is I actually, as opposed to seeing it as a negative quality trait or being threatened by it, I embraced it. So I built a team around me that consists of the very best people that I could find. I have 9 direct reports, and 8 of those were not in the role 2 years ago, so when I took over. So the only person that's still there from, let's say, the previous team is our general counsel. Everybody else, all business leaders, all staff functions are replaced to find the best people that I could find, because I think it makes for better decision making. So again, like I said, I embraced not knowing all the answers, and I'm not threatened by the fact that people on my team are either more intelligent or are subject matter experts on items that I'm simply not. And that's, I think, just one example of how I embraced it. I'm like, no, it's like this is actually a good thing, because ultimately the decision making that we do at Belden will improve, and that's ultimately how I'm being judged as well.
Do any stories come to mind of like when you had to ask for help or admit that you didn't know how to do something, or and not even when you were CEO, maybe even earlier on, or maybe admitting that you made a mistake, and kind of what was going through your mind and what that situation was like?
Yeah, I'll give you an example, which is very embarrassing. So I spent 4 years in Asia. And when I moved I'm originally European, I'm from the Netherlands. And when I moved from Europe to Asia for Belden, for the company, I had previously, for a previous employer, had spent 4 years in the United States. So I go to Asia, Hong Kong, and the company offered me a cultural awareness class, cultural sensitivity class. And I'll never forget this, it was $2,500 US. So I declined it. I'm like, I don't need that. I mean, I'm European, lived in multiple European countries. I spent 4 years in the United States. I don't need that. And then we had a specific example where it kind of bit me. So we were in a meeting room, and somebody was projecting, a team member was projecting, and there were let's say about a dozen people in the meeting room, and I was the leader, and the projector didn't work. So my natural tendency came out, and I did 2 things. I rolled up my sleeves and started working on the projector myself. Like, hey, how does this work? Why doesn't this work? And secondly, I made a sarcastic joke.
What was the joke?
Later, I can't remember exactly, but something like, "Oh, I wish we had somebody dedicated for IT." Something like that.
Oh, okay.
The IT person was in the room. Yeah. So then later, I can give you a couple of other examples during that time frame. But that later, my assistant came to me. I was blessed to have an assistant who was very direct, and she told me, "Roel, you cannot do that. You cannot do that." And I said, "Why?" She says, "I have no doubts that you are technically savvy and can potentially fix the projector, but you are taking away somebody's job. Somebody is proud. Our RT person is a proud Belden associate, and this is his responsibility, it's his job. So by you rolling up your sleeves and doing it yourselves, you're basically saying you're incompetent, and I can do that job better." So it was very but I didn't mean that. I just meant like, hey, let me help solve the problem.
Yeah.
I thought it would be arrogant to sit on the sideline while other people were actually doing something. So that's just one slight example where I'm like, no, this is not okay, and it's embarrassing,
So,
and I
so what
need to
happened?
be
Because that's probably a
well.
pretty
So
vulnerable moment, right? When you're doing something and somebody calls you out on it, you probably, like, what was your response?
oh, I was embarrassed. Yeah, I was embarrassed. But then all of a sudden the penny dropped, and some other things all of a sudden became clear to me. Reactions of people became clear to me. So the point was, whereas I think in general, I do think I display this character trait quite a bit. In that instance, I did not, and it bit me. I should have just taken the class, and this, and I have a few other examples, could have easily been prevented.
So I guess, let me hear some of your other stories, actually. Stories are ultimately what make for a good podcast and what make for a good book. So any stories on vulnerability are always awesome.
Well, this is a pretty classic one, but it happened to me. I'm very much on time. So I hate it when people are late. And I'm very rarely late. Occasionally, it of course happens, but even if I'm 5 minutes late, I send a message or call the person up saying, "Hey, I'm 5 minutes out."
Yeah, I'm the same way.
So I noticed that when we good, yeah. So I noticed that when we started a meeting that was scheduled for 9 o'clock, I noticed that up until 9:10, people were strolling in. And I later noticed, this was in China, mainland China. I later noticed, never alone. There were always at least two people that came in 5 or 6 minutes later or 10 minutes later, whatever. So I said, you know what? The meeting starts at 9. So at 9:01, I close the door. And we'll just have the meeting with like 60% of the people. So I embarrassed them publicly for being a few minutes late, which in that part of the world is extremely acceptable.
Yeah.
There's a different concept of time, so it's very acceptable. So that was quite embarrassing, and I'll share with you one more because these showed my positive intentions. I also learned that in some cultures, people just don't like to be singled out,
Yeah.
even if it's for something positive, right? So when I had my Monday morning sales meeting, and we booked a huge order, then I would not on the agenda. I would call it out. I'd say before we get started, this and this person I learned booked a $5 million order, and I think we should all recognize that and give him a hand of applause. So that's also not something that they appreciate. They don't want to be singled out in certain cultures. So all of that could have been prevented. So no damage happened. I had a phenomenal run, and I loved my time there. But yeah, those are three slightly embarrassing stories.
Have you, can you think of a recent story where you've had to maybe ask for help or admit to a failure or admit that you don't know how to do something and then put yourself out there as the CEO is kind of like being vulnerable in a way where people might perceive you as being weak?
Yeah. So the way that I think about it is on three levels. So first is on the level down towards my team, if you will. The second one is horizontal, so with other colleagues. And the third one is towards our board of directors. And I am very comfortable, hence, for example, the example that I gave you on when I selected my team, I'm very comfortable showing the vulnerability below me. So with my team, I'm very comfortable. And I encourage other people to do the same. So whenever we're at a meeting, I said, and we for example, have an engineering topic, then I say, well, that's not my background. So I'm not the expert here. So I need everybody to chip in because most certainly I will not be able to ask the right questions. And when I started as CEO, like I said, although I've had a phenomenal prep, and the previous CEO stayed on board on our board of directors for a year to transition, there are things that you simply are not prepared for. I took over during COVID, and I took over during some social unrest that existed here in this region. So what I did is I quickly connected with a few other CEOs here in town that are from different businesses, either banking or other types of technology companies. And I said, I don't know how to deal with this. So what are you guys doing? So just flat out, no alternative motive. I said, hey, I'm just want to learn. I would appreciate if you help me. So I did that. And the other example that I thought was pretty interesting and pretty cool, also in complete openness, is I received feedback from our chairman of the board. And he says, Roel, the board actually appreciates it if you say these are the things that keep me up at night. Or these are the things that I'm working on and I don't have the answers to. And I thought that was pretty powerful because I showed my vulnerability and acted in a vulnerable way differently towards the board than towards my team and peers. So I thought that was pretty cool, and it actually helped me.
I also read an interview that you did where I think it was the former CEO. He asked you what you wanted your career aspirations to be, and this was, I guess, much earlier on in your career, and you said, well, one day I want to be the CEO of this company, and that was what, like 10 or 12 years before you became CEO? I'm kind of curious, like, what was going
right.
was that 10, 12 years?
12 years ago.
12 years, okay. Yeah. So what was going through your mind? Because that, I mean, I would imagine is some kind of vulnerability there to be so honest of like, I want your job one day.
I know, but it was tough. It was a tough decision because I didn't want to lie and I wanted to share my career aspirations, knowing fully that probably the odds were not very high at that point in time, right? So put myself out there versus being perceived as arrogant.
Yeah.
Like, well, what do you know? What do you know, right? You're just getting started. So I remember that very well. And I actually got help. I went to our regional CFO at the time. I was living in Europe. And I said, this is what I want to do. And this is what I think I should fill in because it's the truth. And I said, do you think I can do that? And the coaching I received was, yeah, absolutely, do that. So I actually hesitated. And I'm glad that I was true to myself and put myself out there because it was extremely well received. So the previous CEO looked at it and he says, okay, well then let's go work on it. And he wrote me a development plan that I very diligently followed up on. And I was very fortunate and blessed to be in a position that I was able to gather a lot of experiences that are now helping me in the job. So
That's awesome. It seems like you had a supportive CEO.
Oh yeah. His name was John Stroop, and he was very instrumental in my career. Yeah, he prepared me for virtually everything. But like I said, when you're actually in the seat, it feels different.
Yeah.
But yeah, very blessed.
One of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with is how can you be vulnerable, especially at work, without being perceived as weak? Is that ever something that has popped into your mind or something you've struggled with, either as CEO or earlier on in your career? Like, how do I share about myself or ask for help without people thinking that I'm not capable or not good at my job?
Absolutely. So, yeah, 100%. I feel that. So, what I do is I set boundaries. So, whenever we're talking about a certain topic or a certain market, then I say, well, this is a certain element that that I'm not very experienced in, or that I don't have certain thoughts on. But I would never say, and fortunately, thank God, that's not the truth, so I don't have to say it. But I would never say, "Well, I don't know what I'm doing," or "I am like completely lost right now, and I need a break." So, stuff like that. So because that I don't think sets the right example. People do want somebody that is able to keep a cool head and makes decisions, right? At the end of the day, make decisions and with as much input and as best data as is available, and move on. But yeah,
Interesting.
that's certainly that's what I do.
Yeah, sorry. One thing that I thought was very interesting about what you said is so you're never going to go in front of your company and say, I don't know what the hell's going on. I don't know if I should be here. Like, you're not going to, cause panic. But at the same time, what happens if you genuinely don't know what to do next, or you are struggling? How do you balance, you said boundaries. How do you create those boundaries of like still being vulnerable, but also letting people know that things are okay and that you have that sense of optimism, even when you're unsure?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's been 2 years. So, the reason why I love my job and why, knock on wood, so far it's been going reasonably well, at least most certainly if you look at the share price appreciation. I do know what to do, so that's good. So that helps me.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are situations where I'm with my team where we're talking about something that is new and that I'm not so familiar with, and then I just solicit input, and then I solicit input from everybody. So then I tell them, I said, guys, I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to ask everybody's opinion on this because not only am I interested in hearing what you think, but also because I need your input because I don't know exactly how to tackle this problem.
Yeah.
I just say that flat out.
How much of vulnerability is people knowing about you as a person outside of work, like about your family, your passions, your interest? I know that you're like a very avid guitar player. So how much or how important is it for people to know the personal side of Roel besides just the kind of the work side?
I'm pretty open about it because I have received feedback early on in my career that I can be perceived as arrogant.
Interesting.
Just initially, in the very first conversation, I'm pretty big, I'm 6'4", and people tell me that I have a certain type of presence, right? So that's the opposite of what I want. I 100% do not want people
Yeah.
for me to be perceived as arrogant. So yeah, so I'll deal with that. I'll make sure that people know that I'm just a human being like everybody else, and I have hobbies, and I like to spend my time. I'll say, for example, which is obviously the truth. I say, yeah, I love to play golf, but I'm a horrible golfer. I'm terrible. Now, I don't have to say that, but that makes it a little bit more human,
Yeah.
I think. So yeah, it's important. It's important that, and it's we have a tendency. You know what, Jacob? We have a tendency, certainly people in my role, to make ourselves even far more important than we are. I mean, being a CEO, first of all, it's something temporary, and it says nothing about who I am. It says nothing about him. It's a job that I'm fulfilling at the time. I'm very blessed to be in this position, but it doesn't even scratch the surface as to describe who is Roel Vestjens. So not just CEOs, but I see that a lot with colleagues, where we depict ourselves to be far more important than we are, and I hate that. I don't like that at all. So, and I
Yeah.
think talking about your personal life helps.
Yeah. Um, can you overshare? Can people share too much about themselves? Can they, do you think, ask for too much help? Or, because I would imagine if you show up to work each day and you're just like, hey, I'm Roel here. I'm sharing everything about myself and here's what I had for breakfast. And, I don't know what I'm doing. People are going to see that vulnerability as indeed a weakness. So how do you balance the vulnerability piece with making sure that people don't see you as being weak? Or how do you even set those boundaries? Like, who do you share with? What do you share? How do you figure that stuff out?
Yeah, I think that's intuition. I think it's intuitive. I think you feel, right? You feel the room, you feel the people that you work with. If you have a long relationship with people, then I think it's easier to let your guard down,
Yeah.
for example, right? Or share. If there's people that you just started working with, then probably it's not that appropriate yet because they can't place it, they don't understand it, how you think. So it has to do with the depth of the relationship, I think, and it has to do with the circumstances. So if we're in a meeting where we need to make tough decisions, for example, in terms of downsizing our cost structure, or tough decisions in terms of disciplinary actions, or our statements towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, those kind of things, then it's probably not appropriate to overshare, to say how was my weekend and what I did, and because that's not what we're there for.
Yeah.
And if it's a lighter meeting and it's a good atmosphere, and the major decisions have been made and the business is going well, so then probably it's a little bit more appropriate. So I think it depends on the circumstances, and it depends on the depth of the relationship that you have with the other people.
When you think back during the course of your career, has there been a particular moment that most shaped who you are as a leader? An experience, a moment, a situation that most shaped who you are?
I find that hard. What I do remember is when I was a little kid, I sat in my dad's car and we drove through town and we drove past the largest employer. And I'm originally from a very small town, 30,000 people in the Netherlands, and we had one large employer. And I asked my dad, I said, "Do you think I will ever be a CEO?"
How old were you, by the way,
And
when you asked this?
I can't remember, but if I were to guess, I'd probably say 12, 13 years
Okay,
old,
it's pretty young.
I would guess. Which so his reaction doesn't really matter. But I learned later that the fact that I was thinking at that point in time was intrigued me. Because my dad was in public office. He worked in a nursing home for 24 years. And then he rolled into public office on a regional, local, and then on a regional level. So, business and working for corporation was not something that how I was brought up.
Yeah.
And for me to recognize that that's what I wanted to do at a very early age, and also my point of view in a very risky environment, like I wanted to become a CEO in the United States. I'd never been on an airplane before, like I said, when I first moved to the United States, but that's always what I wanted to do. I think that was really putting myself out there, and I knew intrinsically that that's what I wanted to do. So,
Moment with the dad. I
yeah,
like it.
I think when I looked back, I started my professional career. I look back, and for some reason, I'll never forget that moment, and that was a huge driver for me.
Yeah.
To climb the corporate ladder.
But what did your dad actually say? Do you remember what he said?
Well, I think he just wanted to protect me from failure.
Yeah.
So I think he said something like, "Well, I don't know, son," or "That's probably not," or something like that. He did not say absolutely. You can if you set your mind to it, you can achieve it. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And it was more. I think he was more trying to help me and protect me for failure, which in turn motivated me because I'm like, well, I'll show him and I'll show everybody that I can do it.
Remember, to get access to the second half of this conversation, which is more fascinating and more interesting than the first part, head over to greatleadership.substack.com and you'll be notified as soon as that becomes available. And in the meantime, I hope you decide to pre-order a copy of the book, which you can do at leadwithvulnerability.com. That's leadwithvulnerability.com. And you'll get access to some really amazing and pretty cool bonuses, including an exclusive webinar that I'm going to be hosting, a sneak peek of the book before it becomes available, and also a couple of bonus CEO interviews that we're going to be releasing in the coming weeks. All of that is available, again, at leadwithvulnerability.com. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'll see you next time.